The breeze startled me. I was standing on the porch, barefoot, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The Carolina sun had just begun to peek through the clouds, soft and gold against the quiet of morning. Then the wind came a sudden rush, sharp and mischievous, brushing against my skin like a hand that knew too much. It caught the hem of my sundress, lifting it higher than modesty allowed, high enough to reveal what I wasn't wearing beneath. For a heartbeat, everything was still. And then I heard the slow creak of wood footsteps on the porch steps. Mark, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. He froze when he saw me, and for the briefest, most dangerous moment, we didn't breathe. My pulse hammered in my throat. His eyes locked on mine, wide and uncertain, though not in shock. His gaze didn't dart away. It stayed steady, silent, heavy. It wasn't embarrassment painted across his face, it was something deeper. Something that lived in the space between restraint and recognition. The kind of look that doesn't ask permission because it already knows the answer. Morning, Lorraine, he said finally, his voice roughened by nerves, cracking slightly at the edge. You're early, I managed to say, though I had no reason to. No excuse for my tone or my trembling hands. He smiled faintly, awkwardly. Julia said you needed someone to check the gutters. We both knew that was a lie. The kind spoken not to deceive, but to fill the silence that had already said too much. The air between us felt charged, trembling. The wind had calmed, but the tension hadn't. I could have gone inside, closed the door, pretended nothing had happened. But instead, I stepped aside and said softly, "Come in." My name is Lorraine. I'm 60 years old and live alone in a small white house just outside Savannah. It's the kind of house that remembers every sound, every silence, every shadow that passes through it. The walls are lined with framed smiles from another lifetime, the kind of pictures that lie politely about happiness. My husband and I were married for 34 years. He left 2 years ago for someone younger, someone whose laugh didn't carry the weight of years. I didn't cry when he left. I had already done my crying while he was still here, sitting across from me at dinner, more absent than present. When you spend decades beside someone, you learn the language of distance. You learn how silence can bruise. By the time he packed his bags, love had already packed itself away. What he took wasn't just his clothes, it was the last version of me that felt seen. Mark is 35, my daughter Julia's husband. They've been together nearly a decade. I used to think they were inseparable, the kind of couple who could survive anything. But lately, when I looked at Julia, I saw the same emptiness I used to carry, the soft exhaustion of loving someone who has stopped reaching back. She once told me Mark had grown distant, quiet, always distracted. I didn't realize then how familiar that distance would feel when it stood on my porch. That morning, when the wind lifted my dress, it didn't just expose skin, it peeled back years of loneliness. It reminded me that I was still a woman, still capable of being noticed. And the look in Mark's eyes proved he had noticed. That night, standing before my mirror, I didn't study my wrinkles. I studied the reflection of a woman who suddenly felt seen again, and that was far more dangerous. The next afternoon, I saw the flash of his truck in the driveway. My first thought was that he'd come by mistake, that maybe he'd taken a wrong turn. But then I saw him step out, Mark, in faded jeans and a gray shirt, carrying nothing but that same uneasy calm. I hadn't called him. Julia hadn't said he was coming. Yet there he was again, as if pulled by something neither of us wanted to name. He smiled faintly when I opened the door. "Julia said your kitchen faucet's dripping," he said, his tone too casual, too rehearsed. Another lie, gentle and clumsy. My faucet worked just fine. I could have told him that. I should have. But instead, I stepped aside again. He sat at the kitchen table while I pretended to busy myself with the fruit bowl, the curtains, the same mug I'd washed twice already. The air between us was heavy, humming. I could feel his gaze steady, careful, almost apologetic. Not hunger, not yet, but curiosity. Something searching for warmth in a place he shouldn't have been looking. "You doing all right?" he asked, voice soft, hesitant. It was such an ordinary question, yet it cracked something inside me. "I'm fine," I lied. "Why?" He traced the rim of his coffee mug with his thumb. "You just seem quieter lately." "That's because I am," I said, and for the first time, I didn't hide the truth. He nodded, eyes distant. "Sometimes I walk around the house with Julia and feel like a guest. Like we're both acting out a part we forgot how to mean." I looked at him, understanding far too well. Marriage isn't always a home, Mark. Sometimes it's just a hallway with too many locked doors. And that was where it began. We talked for hours that day, long after the sun had slipped behind the trees. The conversation moved like slow water, gentle at first, then deeper, pulling us both in. We didn't talk about faucets or chores. We talked about the kind of heartbreak that doesn't shatter. The kind that fades quietly until you forget what it ever felt like to be wanted. Mark spoke with his hands, his eyes, his silences. He told me that Julia had grown distant, that she barely looked at him anymore, that sometimes he felt invisible in his own home. I listened, maybe too closely, because I knew that feeling by heart. When he spoke, I saw in him a reflection of my own past, the years I spent pretending not to notice the distance growing between me and the man I once loved. "I don't miss my husband," I said finally. "I miss who I used to be when I was loved." The words left my mouth before I could take them back. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive, pulsing with something unspoken. His hand brushed mine as he reached for the sugar. The touch was brief, innocent enough to deny, but dangerous enough to remember. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. From that day on, Mark began stopping by more often. Sometimes he brought excuses, broken gutters, loose boards, flickering lights. Other times, he came with nothing at all but the weight of wanting to be seen. We sat in the same kitchen, shared the same coffee, the same quiet. It wasn't lust then, not yet. It was recognition to people lost in different versions of the same loneliness. And when he finally stood to leave one evening, he whispered, "I tell you things I don't even tell Julia." And I let him. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that felt too still, too heavy with waiting. Julia had taken the kids to her parents for the weekend. Mark was supposed to be golfing with friends, or at least that's what she believed. But when I heard the sound of gravel crunching in my driveway, I already knew it was him. No excuses this time. No pretense of fixing things that weren't broken. Just truth, uninvited and inevitable, standing at my door. He didn't knock. He didn't even hesitate. When I opened the door, we simply looked at each other. Words felt useless. I stepped aside, and he walked in like he belonged, like this moment had been waiting for us both. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything we hadn't said. He sat on the couch, hands resting on his knees, eyes tracing the room as though trying to memorize it. The ticking of the clock was the only sound between us. I wanted to tell him to leave, to remind him who I was, who he was. But the truth was, I didn't want to. The quiet stretched until it began to ache. "I think about you," he said finally, his voice low, trembling. "More than I should." My breath caught. "Do you think about Julia when you're here?" His jaw tightened. I tried to. That answer hurt more than it should have. The honesty of it burned. We sat shoulder to shoulder, barely touching, yet the space between us felt alive, dangerous. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from mine. I didn't move forward. I didn't move away, in that moment. I understood something simple, and terrible betrayal doesn't always start with a kiss. Sometimes it starts with the silence before one.